for the record, so as they say, state your name, please.
Walter Jackson.
Okay. And Walter, you are from Titusville. Talk to me about where you lived and your experience, say, growing up in Titusville.
Well, actually, Solomon, I'm from the South Side. I'm 1 block removed from the boundaries of the South Side and Titusville.
Okay.
I grew up on 8th Street South, and that's just past the underpass there on 6th Avenue, and then we're in Titusville.
So did you ever actually live in Titusville?
I had a lot of relatives living in Titusville and spent a great part of my younger days in Titusville on Memorial Park.
Was it at Memorial Park that you spent that time, or any other parts of Titusville?
All over Titusville.
Talk to me about what you remember about life in Titusville.
Well, Titusville was the area really growing up in those days was a neighborhood of choice. And basically we're talking Titusville, we're talking what they call North Titusville and South Titusville. Where we're located right now, we're in North Titusville. Most of all of the park areas that we had it was in North Titusville. A lot of the businesses were in North Titusville along 6th Avenue South, and then in the other parts of the neighborhood back around 4th and 5th Avenue, around in there. And all of that sports fields, et cetera, were in Titusville, North Titusville. And that's where most of all of the residents spent their evenings, most days watching sports, participating in sports, and then just being casually out around the sports areas.
Sports, baseball, football?
Football, baseball, and we had a tennis court right there on Memorial Park. As a matter of fact, it was a clay court, a beautiful clay court. And we had residents who came out from all over the city to come there and play on that court.
I've talked to other people who've talked about what Titusville had back in the day. It seemed that Titusville lacked for nothing.
It really didn't lack for much. As a matter of fact, my dentist was located in Titusville on 4th Avenue, right in front of, well, that's really 5th Avenue, right in front of Washington Elementary School. She was the first female dentist in Birmingham and possibly Alabama.
I am aware of that there were 2 bowling alleys in Titusville, that there were obviously shops and stores. There was an area that folks called a golf course in Titusville, where Loveland Village was. Talk to me about those recollections.
That is correct. That was a golf course on that property prior to the development of Loveland's Village. Loveland Village took up a lot of that acreage. And we did have bowling alleys, and we're approximately 2-3 blocks from where we are right now, where the bowling alley was. Really, it was in the area where Golden Flake is located right now.
You talked about Titusville being an area of choice. I take it that it is where black folks would have chosen to be.
That is correct. As a matter of fact, a lot of people who relocated from the South Side moved into Titusville. As a matter of fact, the area was developing. There's an area that we all knew as Honeysuckle Hills. And a lot of those houses were built for returning veterans. It ultimately became an area where a lot of our school teachers resided, as a matter of fact. We had a great many who were there. But in the earlier days, including North Titusville, a lot of our residents lived here. A lot of the houses were frame houses, et cetera, but they were well kept, managed. It was one of the first areas where blacks could actually own property and own homes. And so that area grew up in that regard. So in terms of businesses, again, we had businesses located along the upholstery shops. As a matter of fact, the first owned service station in this area, and I believe that was a Gulf service station, was located right on First Avenue and First Street and 6th Avenue South, black owned.
There seem to have been so many black-owned operations, businesses here. Is it overstated to say that Titusville felt like utopia?
Well, I guess in the days in which I grew up, which was the early 40s through the mid 60s, it was. We had quite a bit. It was still a neighborhood of choice even into the 60s. We had a lot of businesses located up and along 6th Avenue that were thriving. Homes were well kept, and we had a great many residents who lived here.
I've talked to some people, other people I've interviewed, who have talked about their parents having shielded them from the Birmingham that was beyond Titusville. Did you feel shielded?
Well, in those days, the older residents sort of embraced the children and sort of guided them in terms of the do's and don'ts and what to be aware of in terms of the period we were living in, which was hard segregation. And so in that regard, I would suppose you would talk about shielding, but as in my lifetime and growing up and with my friends and all, while we were aware of it, we didn't feel constrained in terms of going out, playing late. As a matter of fact, where I lived, where my grandmother lived, we used to sleep in the front yard overnight. We felt comfortable. We saw a lot of violence that was inflicted upon some residents by the police. And we'd all quite often hear rumors that the Klan is going to march that night. And of course, being youngsters, we wanted to see who the Klan was. We wanted to see the marchers, so we would hang out, but we'd be on the front porch, on the yards. But I never saw any Klans marching along the streets.
Did you ever experience, or when do you remember first experiencing racism?
In terms of having an incident that was directed personally in which I was involved, I only had one incident personally. In those days, we would congregate pretty much on what we call the corners, in front of a little cafes and grocery stores, etc. The police would come along and they would roust you whenever they felt like it. And they, of course, they'd come over and pat you down and talk pretty ugly and mean towards you, etc. So one incident in which I was involved personally occurred when the police would come around, and of course we would oftentimes get off the block running. So we ran, and of course the officer came around in this car and he picked us up, put us in his car, and searched us. And of course we didn't have any weapons or anything on me, but I had a watch. It was a Timex watch that I had won as a part of a contest that was conducted by my local branch of the Birmingham News. I was a news carrier in those days, and of course we had whoever would get the largest number of new subscribers for the deliveries, they would win a prize. And so I won a Timex watch, and I had this watch on that night when that officer accosted us. When he noticed the watch, and we were all in the back seat, and of course he was in the front seat, and he was leaning back over into our faces and all, and confronting us, pretty hostilely. And so he asked me why I got the watch, and I told him why I got the watch. And he wanted me to confess to the fact that I had stolen the watch, and of course I wouldn't. He took his pistol out, and he put his pistol to my head. And he called me the N-word and asked me to confess that I'd stolen that watch. And I told him I did not steal the watch, I don't steal, and I had won the watch. And so he threatened to shoot me and said that, again, using the N-word, that I wasn't worth a bullet. And so that's the incident I had. That's probably the only incident that I recall in terms of direct racism and police tactics in those days. And that's about the only one I had. The other one I had, well, I was coming from the movies one late evening, and there was a parking lot where the Thomas Jefferson Hotel is. They had a garage there where they would park cars right there on the street, and of course that was where the Thomas Jefferson is now. That's that's 2nd Avenue North. And so that was a German Shepherd dog that the keeper would keep in there, and et cetera. And the dog would be on a chain, but he would oftentimes be able to come out onto the sidewalk. And when we would oftentimes get past down near that location, we would get on the other side of the street because we knew the dog was there. Well, this time along, I forgot the dog, and I was coming along not suspecting anything. And the dog chased out after me, and so my only way to get away from the dog was to jump on top of a brand new Cadillac. I'm on top of the hood of the Cadillac. And of course the keeper just used the N-word and threatened to told me I need to get off of that car or he was going to shoot me, pull his pistol out, etc. And I told him I wasn't coming down until he got that dog away from me, and I didn't move. And so he got the dog down. That's the only 2 incidents that directly affected me. But I saw quite a bit of brutality on the part of law enforcement in those days, and heard about quite a bit of others that some friends of mine may have been involved in.
That incident with the officer pointing the gun to your head, threatening to shoot you, and the other things about what you heard, how were you impacted by that and those?
Well, honestly, it didn't affect me. I mean, I knew I was aware of racism. I was aware that we were in a segregated place, but my hopes and aspirations, and in terms of growing up in my family and the community, we just had a sense of overcoming. We couldn't let it affect us one way or the other, and to this day, it didn't affect me at all. It was one of those things you had to live through because it was quite prevalent.
In those days, children growing up, I have no doubt that Caucasians who tuned in to Leave It to Beaver or other such shows that are on television that depicted family life, and if a character, if Beaver or some other Caucasian child, particularly male, said that he someday wanted to be president of the United States, his parents would have certainly said, of course you can. You can be anything you want to be. Would black children have been given the same advice?
My experiences, Solomon, in terms of my family and my friends and my teachers, etc., was all encouraging. They didn't direct us toward any particular profession or any particular occupation. What they said is that prepare yourself to achieve, and that's the environment I grew up in, and both my older brothers and sisters and all of us, I grew up in that family. That's the attitude we had. We had aspirations that no one could suppress, and we were encouraged to just achieve and do the best we can.
Your aspiration growing up was to be an attorney, is that
Yes,
correct?
that's correct.
Why?
Well, to address some of the wrongs, I grew up, at a pretty early age. I really embraced the Constitution and the Declaration of at that time. It really affected me to aspire to overcome the conditions in which we were living then. And I had a lot of older persons in the community who themselves were gainfully employed and was striving to overcome. And so I just thought that one of the things that we could do in that regard was to be in a position to address and redress some of the harms that was and the roadblocks that were impeding our progress in that regard. It was probably the easiest way to do that was to engage the system and become an attorney. And of course, we subscribed to a great deal of magazines, including Jet, Look, and Reader's Digest, etc. And I had become aware of Thurgood Marshall, etc., and what he was doing. And so that has sort of inspired me to go in that direction.
Again, you lived in Birmingham, Alabama, thought to be the most segregated place in the world.
It was.
No question.
No.
And no doubt the sermon that was being preached unofficially by Caucasians in this city was, you are black and you will be held back. You don't think about getting what I've got. Don't think about getting to where I am. Quote, stay in your place. Not something you were willing to do?
No. Not something that that was ever impressed upon me by family members or relatives or the people in the community. It wasn't taught that way. We were taught to achieve, and you would be in a better position than we are, and then you would make a better position for your children. So we were all encouraged. I mean, we just didn't have that. All of our school teachers said the same thing, and of course they were role models themselves. And a great many of them, my teachers were actually young and probably had graduated college and came into the profession 3 and 4 years when they were teaching me at Ullman High School. I remember Miss Odessa Woolfolk, Dr. Woolfolk. She was a newly graduate from college when she came back to Ullman to teach. Same thing with Miss Lena Horn, not Lena Horn, but Mrs. Horn. Same thing. She was a young person right out of college, really, 2-3 years at the most, when they came back to Ullman and taught us. And so we had good role models, and they encouraged us in that regard.
I'll drop a few names here, and you can give me your thoughts, impressions of them. Bull Connor.
That was the bull. He was a real racist, hardcore, and he was a dominant figure in the community. Everyone knew of him. We'd hear the name Bull Connor, and Bull, when we were 5 and 6, 7, 8, 9, throughout. Bull was on the scene. He was the person that you had to watch out for, so to speak. He dominated the political scene and really the civic scene around here.
George Wallace.
Well, George was he was a staunch segregationist. He believed in it, and I can recall his famous words that he would never be again out niggered. We subscribed to all of the newspapers, the Birmingham Post-Herald, as well as the Birmingham News. We had those newspapers coming to my house from when I was first born. My father was a prolific reader, and we was always on the radio listening to the news, etc. And when we finally were able to get a television in the house, my father watched the news religiously, and so we heard this, and so we knew all about George Wallace. He was a staunch segregationist, and as a matter of fact, I was quite aware of all this real big segregationists around here in Jefferson County by reading the newspapers and listening to the news.
I believe I've read that you had family members who were involved in the movement.
Yes.
I think you were in the military at that
I was in the military. As a matter of fact, my earliest times of remembering the beginning of the mass movements was when I attended a mass movement at St. Paul Methodist Church. I think that was around 1956. That was organized by the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights. I accompanied my mother to that meeting, and that was one of the first mass meetings of that time, when really the move was on to desegregate the buses. and that mass movement was held. And so I attended a couple of 3 meetings with my mother during those times before I graduated high school and went into the military. So my mother, my sisters, and my brothers attended the meetings. They marched in the meeting, in the movement meetings. And my mother actually attended, along with my aunts, attended the Selma March. And as a matter of fact, my mother was injured. She had just bought a brand new car, took the car down to Selma. And they coming back, that was a tire blew out. And come to find out later, the tire had been cut. It was a brand new car. She hadn't had it 5 or 6 months. And so, as I recall, as it was told to me when I returned from the service, because they didn't write and tell me anything about what was happening in that regard, when the emergency services showed up in the ambulance, the attendant initially refused to even transport it to the hospital. But so happened there was a white doctor who was on that scene and threatened some actions if he didn't do what was necessary. And that's the only way she was attended and taken care of. So my older sister, she is recorded as being one of the foot soldiers, and that's recorded in those chronicles. And my younger brothers participated in those marches also.
As you fought for your country, in what conflict war was that?
That was during the Vietnam era, and so I was really in the Air Force, stationed in Germany. So we were not near any war fronts.
But you were wearing the uniform of the U.S. military. You represented a country that back home you had family being subjected to those things. Obviously, you learned about it later. Did you have any conflict in your mind about service to this country?
None. This was my country. I was always certain that I was going to participate in the country as a full citizen. Segregation and the events that took place in Birmingham, et cetera, was just part of life. It was growing up. We had to overcome. And so you endured it, and you didn't like it, but really it was a part of doing what was necessary to overcome.
That song, "We Shall Overcome," was so often sung at rallies, during marches. No doubt it was encouraging. Was there ever any doubt as to whether you would truly, or rather whether we would truly overcome?
Not in my mind. And I don't think that was the feeling on the part of the majority of black folks. We felt that we were going to achieve. That was part of our faith as Christians. And during our time growing up in the church, we were taught that there was an all-encompassing God. We had a good faith, and so we knew that we wouldn't be abandoned. We were just not afraid of the forces that were seeking to hold us back. There were, even in my times of growing up, there were persons of goodwill, white residents, and during the marches and all, who engaged with black folks, as you know. And so we had confidence that we were going to, that right was on our side, that we were going to overcome. And so I never felt any different, not even to today. I'm concerned greatly today in terms of the forces that are seeking now to again try and suppress our aspirations and hopes. And but I'm not concerned that they'll prevail. My greatest fear right now is the lack of real understanding on the part of young blacks in terms of what they're faced with. and what they need to do right now in order to be prepared for it. There is great opportunities, but there are also great peril that's confronting us right now, even more so, because those forces are moving pretty consistently and aggressively, on all levels of the society to suppress us.
There are some, particularly of the Caucasian persuasion, not all, but some, who will pose the question, haven't you overcome yet?
They do. But then even I think deep down inside, they know that that's not the case. In some regards, you have those persons who who themselves have to have that feeling because their way of life is not, they don't ever have to face some of those same perils that African Americans and black people have to face. And so it's quite easy to say that, but I think deep down they understand that there's still a lot of institutional barriers that suppress us. And so you'll hear that, but don't let it bother you.
Coming back to Titusville, as you said, you spent a lot of time here, played here, enjoyed yourself, saw what Titusville was in your days of growing up. What's your impression of Titusville today?
I'm a little sad. What I see now in Titusville right now in terms of the housing stock, some areas of deterioration now in some of the areas where that was really glistening spaces. We're going backwards in terms of this area. There is a lot of housing stock in Titusville. And we are not maintaining it at the level in which it needs to be maintained. A lot of residents still live in Titusville. And I think we have some opportunities to overcome. That's one of the things that the Titusville Development Corporation is dealing with. We don't have enough investment coming back into the area right now that's going to maintain some of the areas where the level of housing is now. I think it's deteriorating too fast. We have a lot of non-homeowners now occupying some of the residential area. But there is still a glimmer of hope. We're going to still try and do what we can do to maintain a level of life that be productive. And again, I think we can turn it around and it'll begin come an area of choice for future generations.
You talk about what we will do. Now, of course, I knew you most recently in your capacity as Chief Deputy County Manager for Jefferson County. Are you still involved? You're retired, so this is where you should kick back and relax, isn't it?
Well, it's difficult to do that. I have 2 young grandsons. My children are still fairly young, their mothers. And so I have to do what I can do to maintain some semblance of opportunities for them. So I'm still keenly aware of what's going on. I sort of have to find a place though where I can be more involved politically. That's difficult. In that regard, in terms of some of the things that are happening now, voter turnout always bothers me, and so I'm going to try and be involved in whatever I can in the ways in which I can contribute, because we still have a long way to go in terms of having the type of representation we need at all levels of government so that they begin to make good policy decisions and direct the resources where they are most needed and necessary.
You talked about that younger generation that's coming up. Do they know, or do they understand, do they comprehend, do they appreciate from whence we have come and the role they have in us not going back there?
I think in terms of the appreciation, they have some awareness, but I think that we have not done a good job in recording that history in a way in which they then would have access to it, can kind of learn some of the pitfalls that are awaiting them in terms of their movement through the society and into the job world. They have great opportunities. They are learning at a much higher level than we were learning at that age, because they are exposed to more opportunities in terms of education. It's a higher quality of knowledge than that's being presented to them, that was presented to us. And so, but in that same regard, the ability to utilize that new knowledge they are gaining is what they're coming to realize is not always available for them. And so I think we got to close that gap in terms of appreciating the history, because it's easy to walk into some minefields that you don't expect to be there and become very, very disillusioned. And it's happening every day. I mean, in terms of the effort now to suppress diversity and inclusion, et cetera, as if we have overcome, those things are still out there. And some of the young professionals now are beginning to see that. And so that's going to be disillusioning to them, but they got to fight through it.
Now, your time at Miles, were you a student at Miles?
I was a student. Mm-hmm. After I returned from the service, I took a little time off in terms of just enjoying myself, so to speak. But then I went back to school. I actually spent a little time in Kentucky, at Kentucky State. And then I came back and subsequently enrolled at Miles. And I graduated from Miles in 1972.
Is that where you got your law?
No, that's where I got my bachelor's degree. After graduating from there, I went to Harvard Law School.
I think you also worked a time at Lawson State?
I did.
In what capacity?
I was director of community affairs at Lawson State under Dr. Jesse Lewis. I acquired that job after I had spent, I believe, about 3.5 years at St. Paul United Methodist Church, running a social justice program that was called the Legal Evaluation and Action Project, Project LEAP. That program was funded by the Board of Global Ministries of the United Methodist Church, and we provided legal assistance to welfare rights organizations and residents who were attempting to become involved in the political situation. We did a lot of things around the Section 5 Voting Rights Act.
Obviously, we know the challenge of our society in general, say Titusville in particular. What should be done? What is the action plan for now?
I think what we see now, that we have to continue to be aggressive in terms of affecting policy. One, we need to become more aware of the constraints we have in terms of realizing real health equity. And a lot of people are not aware of what we're talking about when we talk about health equity. Health equity is not just in terms of the physical health and the medical things. It's also about how we live, where we live, how we grow up, our access to quality services. As you know, Black Americans have a disproportionate rate of death in terms of childbirth, both in terms of maternal death as well as infants not living beyond the first 2 years. We still lack access to quality healthcare services. We're still growing up in poverty. Our schools are still pretty much underfunded. We don't have the level of resources we need in terms of equipping our teachers. And that's a problem generally now we're beginning to find nationally is that the level of learning in terms of achievement is decreasing both in terms of all races, but disproportionately affecting African Americans. And so we have to deal with that, or we are going to begin to experience real setbacks in terms of our kids growing up and being productive. And so we need to look at that, but we have to look at it holistically. We have been attacking and addressing it piecemeal. But the whole question is, in terms of health equity, begins from the cradle to the grave. And we have to look at all of those things. And I think in terms of government policy, et cetera, it don't really address it in that way.
I know that in your time with the county, Cooper Green Hospital, Mercy Hospital, was, I don't mean to diminish it, kind of almost a pet project of yours. You seem to really care about that institution. Why so?
Well, that Cooper Green was the culmination of a long number of years of people really caring for the poor in Birmingham. And again, that was a great many of white persons, particularly women, you know, who was out there working to provide good health care for particularly poor persons, which a predominant number of African Americans were part of that. And so I recall the date that it was announced that Cooper Green was going to open back in '72. I mean, I felt really good about that. I was very surprised that the legislature would enact a law that would provide funding for that to happen. And so over the years, you know, I maintained a real sense of ownership of that. You know, even though I wasn't involved in government or whatever, I just felt that it was a good place to be. So when I had the opportunity to be at the county, and of course at that time, the hospital was sort of had a little turmoil. It had overgone, and it was in a crisis stage, really. But it was an institution that was much needed in terms of having access on the part of poor persons to be cared for. And so it was a necessary item, and I just, you know, took it as a real challenge to try and do what we could do on my part there with the commission. And of course the commission supported it really well, and now we are in a very good position. It always had good resources, but the management, and I'm not talking about management in terms of the directors, the staff there. We just had some really misfortunes in terms of engaging medical services there that got it in that situation. But it's in a good place now, and it's going to be around for a few years, and we need to take much more advantage of it in terms of having low-income persons to enroll and stay enrolled.
You talked before about your disappointment with Titusville, how things are not where they once were. Of course, back in those days, there were schools in Titusville, throughout Birmingham, but Titusville in particular, that really took it upon themselves to educate rising black children. Now you've got a school system whose reputation is not what people want, and a number of people who have a choice leave the system. How is that going to be reversed? Can it be reversed?
Well, I think it will be reversed. I think one of the things that I see now, which is very, very promising, is the city administration is beginning to do things that's going to be helpful. I think that some of the plans that we have now in terms of community development, you know, part of our problem is that in terms of black folks having upward mobility, we sort of, a lot of us moved out, and we took our resources with us. Integration provided opportunities for teachers to be able to go into different places, and a lot of them left. During desegregation, a lot of our quality educators were really displaced. as we sought magnet schools and other places to go and et cetera, and that left some vacuums. We struggled a little bit in terms of leadership at the school level, but I think we've overcome that to a great extent now. And I think that administration is working very closely with the administration in the city, and I think we're going to do it. One of the promising things is the effort now on the part of the mayor and administration to revitalize and redevelop the Smithfield area. That is going to be a tremendous. Those are the kinds of projects that's going to bring back the neighborhoods, and that's one of the things that I want to hopefully see a plan develop for the Titusville area. Washington Elementary School, is a very historic school. Great many of our residents and leaders grew up out of that school. It was again one of the top schools in the city at that time. Same thing with Center Street School, but we lost Center Street School, and that's because of the school-age populations declining in those areas. And that's what we are seeing now in a lot of areas where we see deterioration. When we don't have enough kids around to populate the schools, we're going to have to reverse that. And so, but I think plans like that in terms of residential revitalization will begin to bring those populations back. We're going to have, hopefully we're going to have younger persons with incomes that can afford home ownership. We'll attract them back into these areas because that housing stock can be, it can be salvaged, and it needs to be salvaged. So those are good things, and so I think we have a good future in terms of Birmingham schools.
You mentioned, of course, Washington and Center Street schools. In that Honeysuckle Hill area, there's, of course, Titusville's other school that, of course, no longer with us, West Center Street.
West Center Street, yes.
Yeah, of course, I'm a product of that school, what I like to call the unknown matchbox.
It was.
Nobody knew. No one knew that it existed. No one knew where it was. As you said, Honeysuckle Hill was developed subsequent to the rest of Titusville.
Mm-hmm.
Did it feel back then that it was part of Titusville, or did it feel like some separate place?
No, I think all of us who sort of grew up in the area, we knew it was Titusville. Now we regarded it as a matter of fact, we sort of regarded Honeysuckle Hills as an aspirational situation. That's where we all would want to go, and we expected that it would be there so that when we were in a position to acquire home ownership, it might be an area where you would want to live. And for a while, it maintained that. And I think right now it still has that feel, even though there is some deterioration in some of the areas, but it is still a good area for redevelopment, and it has that feel. And so I think we just felt proud that it was there. I mean, it was a good place to live. Had a great many friends in that area. Of course, two of the most prominent community baseball coaches lived in that area. That was Mr. High and Mr. Mills. They had they coached the baseball team. They owned those teams. They developed them out of nothing. They equipped them, and we had quite a bit of real good athletes that came out of those areas that those guys coached. As a matter of fact, Johnny Farley, who is inducted into the Negro League Baseball Hall of Fame, was on one of those teams. Of course, those teams competed against guys like Lee May, who grew up and went to the Cincinnati Reds, who lived over in the Ridge. So those were some of the fun things that we had around there. And those guys lived in those areas. Quite a few teachers came up out of those areas and lived there for years.
Yeah, I knew Johnny Fairley. He was a member of our church.
Oh, great.
No, absolutely.
Johnny's a great guy.
Yeah.
He was one of our heroes.
No doubt.
Yeah.
No doubt. Is there anything else that through my own ignorance or sheer stupidity I have failed to address in my conversation with you?
I think pretty much you've covered it. I can't think of anything I would would need to add, other than re-emphasize some of the things that we touched on, which was the number of business places and black ownerships of businesses that we had in Titusville, and the nurturing spirit that was in Titusville. You know, it was a good place to feel good about.
As you think back on it, and you think back on the challenges that existed beyond the bounds of Titusville, how impressed are you that your parents and other adults, again, obviously you didn't live in Titusville, you lived just across the line, but how impressed are you that they were as encouraging in the face of Bull Connor and the like?
Stalwarts. They didn't give up. They had pride. They displayed that pride. They inculcated that in the children, and they stood out. They were pillars of the society, and they would lend a hand. And we were well nurtured in having them around.